From Reddit.com AskReddit subreddit, have you ever not slept for so long that you started hallucinating? What was your experience? I suffered from horrific insomnia about 12 years ago. I was on Lexapro and one of the side effects is insomnia. At the time, that wasn't well documented. So I tried everything from Ambien to alcohol so I could sleep. I would usually get about a 3-hour nap at most before being awake again. I would go 3 to 5 days without sleeping. Eventually, I hit the point of desperation and start recreational substances to try and knock myself out. There were several occasions of hallucinations, but the one that sticks out is truly terrible. I was on day 6 without sleeping at least 5 hours. I was laying in bed and a friend came in to start talking with me. We had many great conversations since our friendship began but hadn't talked in a while at that point. I told him how bad I was struggling and that honestly, killing myself would have been easier. He said he felt the same way many times, but that it was a terrible idea and I knew how badly it had messed up his family. When I looked at him, he was a bloody mess on the side of his face. Jaw ripped apart, teeth missing, but talking to me like nothing was wrong. He had been dead for a few years at that point. Suicide. Shot himself in his garage after years of substance abuse. And I just had a 3-hour conversation with a hallucination of a dead friend. I ended up switching meds to Celexa and my sleep issues disappeared within a month. So, if you are having sleeping issues, please, go see a doc. It's a dark place that damn near took me. I used to abuse Adderall and would stay up 3 days straight working on bullshit projects that I never finished. Anyway, one time I was at the end of a 3-day bender where I had taken about 10 days worth of Adderall. As I laid down to sleep, I started hearing my mom arguing with my brother and his girlfriend. It went on for a long time and I was like, surely they have to be at work and this shit will end soon. Eventually my brother's baby started to cry and the adults were too busy arguing to calm her down. I said fuck that and stormed out of the bedroom, down the stairs, and the house was completely empty. A buddy of mine landed a painting job working inside of a big commercial building and he basically stayed in the place for 6 days straight smoking crystal meth and painting to meet his deadline and avoid hiring a crew to help him. On the 6th day the building caught fire and he ran into the lobby and was pulling people out into the streets and yelling to call 911. The firemen showed up and couldn't locate a fire because there was none. He was hallucinating. I stayed up for 3 days straight when I was 17. On the 3rd day, I kept hearing people call my name as if they wanted to ask me a question. It didn't help that I also thought it would be a good idea to go to school that day. Multiple times a day, I would bolt upright and look around to see who wanted to my attention only to see my fellow students huddled over their work. It got worse as the day went. My friends were a little worried about how weird I was acting. I walked home after school, listening to my headphones as usual, but I still kept hearing someone call my name. The music made it worse. Whatever I was hearing was already kind of muffled and having a song playing in my ears only seemed to obscure it more. When I finally got home, I told my mom I wasn't feeling well, went to my room and went straight to sleep, at 4 in the afternoon. As nodded off, I heard that voice calling for me again, making me jerk out of my sleep. This repeated a couple times until I convinced myself that I already told my mom I was sick and if she really needed me, she could come get me. I finally went to sleep and didn't wake until 2 a.m. to use the bathroom and then went to sleep afterwards again until 9 a.m. the next day. I was an idiot. Marine boot camp keeps you awake for the first 3 days straight and if you fell asleep you get fucked up real quick by the drill instructors. After 48 hours I started hallucinating lights/swirls in my vision and had to mentally keep myself awake while doing absolutely nothing most of the time there. Dozing off for even a second was a death sentence so had good motivation. When I finally got to sleep I was woken up an hour into it by a rack mate because I had fire watch and I could have sworn it was my dad like 100% I hallucinated my father waking me up because I was so tired/lost/confused. Watch out for the shadow people. They start getting really obnoxious around 72 hours, and fucking brutal near 100. College. It was December. I was working 1 full-time job and 2 part-time jobs. Final season was coming up, term papers due and who knows what other stressors were going on. I was convinced the brakes were going out on my car and telling one of my bosses about it. He drove the car around the block and told me my brakes were fine. I tried to show him what I meant by driving through the parking lot and he tells me I didn't even tap the brakes as I hopped a curb and drive into a field. He took me to his house and his wife put me up in his daughter's room who was out of state at Colga. I slept many hours, 15 hours maybe, got up and drank some water and went back to sleep for another 12 hours. I'll never forget how my boss treated me. I'll never forget how his wife treated me. The compression and love for someone who did not really deserve it possibly saved my life and someone else's life. Don't drive drowsy, friends. You could forget how brakes work. Earlier this year I took my partner to the ER because he was hallucinating. He was exhausted and dehydrated. His hallucinations involved having snippets of conversations with people who weren't in the room. On the way to the ER he asked me where did they go? I said who? He said your friends who were in the back seat. There was no one with us. Years ago I went traveling on my own for the first time. I got the bus from my city to one of the airports in London. It took almost a whole day because of the changes, and then I had to wait in the airport until the next day for my flight. I ended up trying to sleep on the floor because I was too skint for a hotel. I didn't get much sleep. So the next day I get on my flight and I'm dipping in and out of sleep the whole time. I hallucinated that there was a Shiba Inu on the plane. I thought, oh, that's strange that they're letting a dog walk about the plane. Then I saw a cow on the wing. Oh, that's really strange. I don't suggest doing this at all. But my first one is a little more funny than scary. I worked third shift at a gas station for 6 years. Didn't sleep for 3 days due to insomnia. I was so out of it, I thought there was a purple unicorn named Hugo chilling in the back office, watching me on the cameras and smoking cigarettes. Hugo the purple unicorn would come out and tell me about Philip, the red rhino, taking his business. That's when I knew I needed sleep. Mind you, Hugo the purple unicorn and Philip the red rhino were cartoonish. Kind of like Space Jam. Another experience I had was black liquid dripping from everyone's faces. I always made sure to get enough sleep after that experience. I went about a week without sleep in architecture college. There were some naps there but never deep sleep until the end. I kept drifting out of reality and would act as if I was on dream logic. There were moments of lucidity that I had to cling on to. 24 hours was just some visual flickerings, and glare from lights. 48 hours was things moving in a sort of inertia that my head moved. Like if I looked to the right, everything would sort of keep moving to the right. Started hearing mumbling. 72 hours light hurt me. Started drifting in and out periodically. Some of the dreams would be too real that I would confuse them with reality briefly. 96 hours I had to struggle to keep my lucidity. I had to force myself to think there is a person to my right. There is a laptop in front of me. And when I drifted away from those concrete thoughts, so too did my sense of surroundings. Was hearing voices in a talking level. Was feeling like I was being touched or poked. 120 hours and every beat of my heart caused my senses to full and drift. I couldn't keep my focus easily between moving my hand, poor motor controls, and visually looking. I was unable to understand what people were saying to me. It all kept breaking apart in my head and not forming into cognitive sentences. 144 hours and I couldn't move. There was pain in every part of the body, and parts my disoriented brain thought was my body. Never knew I could feel pain in a non-existent appendage. I kept drifting away into what felt like a dream with slight attachment to reality, feeling all type pain throughout. 168 hours and I couldn't even think. I felt vegetative and my sense of cognition dulled to that of a sea sponge. I had no idea where I was, or what I was doing. I lost sense of self, and my connection to reality. I was a fog of collective lights and strands of light. Pushing and pulling sensation. I think during this last day there were only maybe an hour or two of college homework I could even get done, and I ended up throwing it out because it just was a mess of lines and chipboard. I spent the first 3 days just out cold, aside from a few meals or taking pain meds. Next few weeks trying to recover from the sleep debt, and years later I'm still affected with stuff like N24 or regular sleep patches. Lesson learned, kids, always get at least 4 hours of sleep if you're crunching, and make that debt up soon. It's not worth it. Have done 4+ days without sleep a few times, not recommended. Here's the worst. Had not slept for 5 days straight, don't do drugs, kids, was working full-time running a bar, that explains the drugs, and going to school full-time in the mornings. Went outside to get on my motorcycle and when I turned it on the headlight wasn't the same color it was before. I don't know how to describe it. It was like a bunch of colors all bleeding together. Looked at the garage door and it was being lit up in a way I can't really describe. It was like I was seeing new colors that didn't exist. There was weird halos and rings around the edges, and the white light outside my house was no longer white, it was a weird rainbow color mixture. Definitely should have went back inside and went to sleep, but I hopped on and rode the hour down the interstate to my school and was only able to make it half the day before I had to leave. Fell asleep on my bike the way home, on the highway doing 100+ mph, and almost rear-ended a semi. Have no stayed awake more than a day since and don't plan to anytime soon. Fucking miserable experience. I did a research project in undergrad where I had to monitor animal behavior every hour. And it lasted 72 hours. I was the only one taking data. Note, don't do this. I received roughly 5 hours of sleep over this time period, and one night I began hallucinating weird abstract stuff like a pink Potter-esque woman with yellow hair and a bunch of squiggly lines and a pink haze around me. And then I basically blacked out. I took data, but I have no memory of doing so. I just remember waking up about 40 minutes later and realizing I had done the data collection and had been walking around, but I couldn't remember doing it and had no clue how I had gotten to where I was. It was very strange and just a little scary. Note to scientists, don't make one person collect data over all those hours. At that point, you are not collecting quality data. I have while working a cleaning job at a restaurant. I imagined seeing parsley sprigs every foot of carpet. I saw mice, ducklings, and insects running across the floor and appearing to get run over by the vacuum cleaner I was using. Of course I would stop and check. Took me over twice as long as needed to finish the cleaning after stopping every 5 minutes to check for dead ducks in the vacuum nozzle. However, it was the drive home that made me quit. I know the neighborhood like the back of my hand, but imagine bends in a straight road. After scuffing the curbs on both sides of the road, I pulled over, called my boss, and quit on the spot. Napped for an hour until I was clear-headed enough to make it back to the office. Could have killed someone, but it was at 4 a.m. before anyone was on the road. Never again. 3 days straight with zero sleep back in college. Took a shower to try to reset and get some new energy. As the hot water began to hit my scalp and steam began to generate, I felt my brain liquefy and turn into a gas that was quickly escaping from my skull. This was less a visual hallucination and more a physical/touch/body hallucination. I didn't see my brain escaping my skull, I felt it spewing out as a gaseous mist. I started desperately trying to grab at my misty escaping brain mass to try to shove back into my skull. After about a minute of that, I said fuck school, I need to get some sleep. I had terrible insomnia and literally didn't get a wink of sleep in about 3 days. Near the end of the third day, I had to go to a fancy dinner. When talking to some colleagues I just met, the hallucinations kicked in. I went from being able to focus on our mundane conversation using all my concentration to dreaming part of the conversation in real time while awake. So I answered questions that were never asked, commented on statements that were never made, and ignored my interlocutors when they were specifically addressing me. I started having gaps in my short-term memory, like I was teleported 10 seconds into the future, and someone had taken control of my body and carried on the conversation in my place for that time. I must have looked really weird to them, but after a couple of blunders, I explained that I was on my 60th hour of uninterrupted consciousness and I think they understood. On my way home, some of the people I perceived walking by, I don't want to say I saw them, it's more a general perception based on peripheral vision and sound, disappeared as soon as I focused on them. After I got home, I started having dreams awake. I knew they were dreams, there was a clear separation between the real world and dream world, kind of like you can imagine things and still function normally in parallel, except I had less control over what I imagined. Then the real world and the dream started blending together. I would accidentally move in real life like I meant to move in my dream, and it took effort and focus to differentiate between the two. I finally slept that night, after about 65 hours awake. It wasn't fun. I am a nurse, woke up one morning at my regular time. 5 a.m. Worked 7 a 6 p or so, typical day. Got home, made dinner. Settled into bed, watched some TV, got a call around 10:30 p. Supervisor for 11 p 7 a got into a car accident. I went in thinking, okay, I can manage until 7 a.m. with some Monster or Red Bull. Busy night. But it's 7 a.m. Staffing is bad. Can't leave them like that. I'll just do the morning med pass and go. Roof AC unit breaks down. Hot summer day. Need to facilitate temp reports for Department of Health, help put fans in all the rooms, find someone to fix it, etc. Some genius left a door open on the dementia unit. Now, I need to help get the escapee back in the building, notify family, file reports with DOE, secure the building, okay. Running on Red Bull and pure adrenaline. By the time the someone came to relieve me, things were getting so weird. I head home around 6 p. Family is in the pool, steaks are grilling. I am so hot and so hungry. I disregard the fact that I am struggling to get undressed and into my swimsuit. Splash around in the pool until dinner is ready. By the time I sat down to eat, seeing shadows and hearing voices, I become so paranoid and scared. Couldn't sleep until the sun comes up the next morning. Worst weekend ever. Yes, I was up for 7 days straight, dawn to dawn. It was sorta not intentional. I was between jobs and got super into an online game before realizing that the sun had come up 3 times since I had started. So I figured screw it, I'll just stay up for a week. Because that's what you do when you're young and stupid. On the 3rd or 4th day I started getting weird flickering/fleeting shadows out of the corner of my eye, and it went downhill from there. The hallucinations were never sharp or clear, they were always moving/twitching blotches and shadows, always out of the corner of my eye. Ultimately I managed to make it to 7:30 a.m. 7 days later. I was completely exhausted, wrung out, scatterbrained as all hell, and could barely hang on to a coherent train of thought. When the click ticked over I immediately passed out and slept for 36 hours straight. When I woke up I had a massive headache, I was extremely groggy like I'd slept maybe a couple of hours, and thought I had slept 12 hours. Took me a bit to realize I had missed an entire day. As mentioned by others, this is definitely bad for you, do not recommend, and if I had known any better I wouldn't have pushed it so long. I had strep throat that my doctors wouldn't treat me for. I was on about 1 hour of sleep per day. At the start of week 3 I was sitting in the shower. It's the only time I could sleep. I was staring off into the distance, basically the shower faucet wall, while sitting with my back against the back shower wall. As I staring out, the shower faucet wall just starts flying back. It's a 4-foot tub, 6 foot. The tub stretched about 50 yards last my feet and out. I can't feel the water anymore. A large knife sticks out of the wall almost like a finger, and drags down slowly. As it cuts down the wall from the inside of the wall, it opens into a black abyss like a portal of negative light. The portal is cut 5.5 feet long. Then 2 hands with knives come out and grasp around the side. They push the portal wall open and the thing steps out, one leg then the other. It looks like a human. It stand up straight, kooks at me and starts springing hard as I have ever seen a human form move. As he is coming, I can't move. Everything in my body is screaming, get up, move, there is still time. Fucking move your legs, pussy, come on. I feel nothing but the intense focus of my eyes. The ml of adrenaline coursing through my body, my heart pounding out of my chest like I have never felt before. 3 seconds into his sprint I realize who it is. The red and black sweater. The knife-tipped fingers. The burned face of the human form running at me. It was Freddy Krueger. I still can't move him, sitting down back against the rear wall. I feel nothing but panic and impending doom. He gets up to me, full speed, knife hand out, reach to grasp over my face. All I see are his leathery hands, the glint of light on the blades. As soon as I accept it's over, it all is over. At 3 times the speed that this all happened, he is sucked back the 50 yards. The portal closes and the shower wall slides super fast back to normal position. I feel the water again. I'm panting. My chest hurt like it's never done or has since it ached for an hour or so. I feel like I just worked out for 3 hours. I can barely move my limbs. I feel extremely overheated. It took everything to get the water to cold so I could cool off. The 3rd doctor finally believed I had strep throat and gave me antibiotics. My mistake was going to 2 young doctors first who didn't take my input and wanted their fresh degree do the talking. Got a guy who had been a doc for like 30 years. He walks in, says, "How are you doing?" I tell him I have strep throat and need antibiotic. I never use them until I need them, doc, and I fucking need them. He doesn't even check me. I says, "Yeah, you have strep." I ask, "How do you know?" He says he could smell it on my breath when he walked in the room. Worst case he saw in 30 years of being a doctor. Was cleared up with 1 round of antibiotics. Had 2 doctors tell me it was a sore throat before I found him. The days leading up to Freddy, I got the darting figures or black shadowy forms at the sides of my vision. I knew what they were since I did research on sleep deprivation. So I just ignored them, trying to beat the virus on my own. Once I saw Freddy, I knew the virus was winning and I had just lost. Once I didn't sleep for about 1 week. You might ask how it happened. Me and my friends made a deal that whoever sleeps first needs to pay €100 to the winner. One of my friends, I will use fake names for privacy, Mike, gave up on the 2nd night. 4 days later Jason fell asleep. The only other people who remained were me and Will. We were at my house for the finale, so the other person can't cheat. We stayed up all night, and in the morning Will fell asleep. Of course I was happy that I would get €300 in total, 100 from each person, but then I wanted to experiment and stay up another night. Went really bad, I must say. To pass the time I was walking in the streets with my friends Mike, Jason and Will. After we ate at Burger King, we went out for some fresh air. That's when I started hallucinating. First I saw a silhouette that kept expanding, then it took shape. I think I saw a bunch of zombies looking at me, and I started panicking. I started yelling at my friends to not walk forward and explained them what I saw, and of course, if I didn't have sleep deprivation I would have immediately recognized hallucinations, but as you know, in that state your brain doesn't function properly, and you might not think at all or not question reality. Long story short, my friends got me home and I immediately fell asleep. Next morning they got me to the doctor to inspect me. They were inspected 2 BCS. They too stayed up, remember? I was given some medicine to make me sleep, and plus some antidepressants because I was scared for my life in the dark because I kept hallucinating. This went on for a month. The moral of the story is don't participate in games with your friends that you know can damage your health, and don't do this experiment. I also developed this insanely huge fear of the dark and zombies. Please don't try this, it's not worth it. Oh shit, okay. Here's my story. I stayed up for 105 hours once. Would not recommend it and will never do it again. The why is that I'm not really sure. Circumstances led to me being up for about 50, and I got it into my head that I wanted to see how far I could go. I started getting mild hallucinations at about 80, and it just got worse from there. At about 90, a couple friends came over to my place because they hadn't seen me in a couple of days. They found me sitting on my bed watching a pile of socks dancing around the room. They, being the good friends that they are, decided that they couldn't just leave me in that state. So they both took a few hits of acid so they could join me. A few hours later, we're in different corners of my apartment watching the patterns on wall do stuff. Personally, I was watching a parade of circus animals. Suddenly over the radio, the song The Safety Dance started playing. As one, the three of us broke away from the walls and started doing the safety dance around the room. I'm not sure who started it, but someone started stripping off clothes, and soon we're all naked and dancing around the apartment. After about 15 minutes of that, we decided to take it outside. The next hour or so was taken up by dancing a naked safety dance around the neighborhood. Lord knows how we didn't get arrested. Fortunately, one of my friends came to her sense and talked the rest of us into going back home, where we proceeded to eat all the fruit in my fridge and beat up on a piñata that I'd bought for my sister's birthday. I ended up passing out not too long after my friends came down from their trip. They just looked so peaceful, I had to join the cuddle, and didn't last long once I hit the pillow. I think I slept about 15 hours after that. I once stayed up for about 60 hours in a row to finish an important essay in third-year college. At about the 36-hour mark I started having intrusive thoughts about how nice it would be to slip under my duvet, rub my face against my pillow, and close my eyes. At about 48 hours I started getting the feeling that someone was in the room watching me. When I turned around, of course, no one would be there. Over the next few hours it gradually got worse and worse. I started feeling that the watcher was getting closer and closer to me, and every time I turned around to check if someone was there it just seemed to get worse. It peaked just at about 56 hours in, when it felt like I could turn around and someone would be face to face with me. I felt as close to this non-existent person as if they were standing behind me with their hands on the arms of my chair, looking over my shoulder. It was some spooky shit. Then dawn broke, and the feeling subsided. My spooky feeling evaporated. I finished my report, went into campus to hand it in, had a soda, spoke to a few friends, and went straight home again to catch up on sleep. My place wasn't haunted. But that 60-hour stint of no sleep and grueling effort was a journey into the unknown. It's a strange feeling, looking at the clock and seeing it read 3:25 a.m. and knowing your work has still barely started, and that in 12 hours' time you still won't even be halfway through your task. I had a college student in my class who went to do his presentation. He took out a poster rolled up, but instead of unfurling it to show the class he reached inside the tube and pulled out a cord he had ripped out of an appliance and declared, "I have an electric snake." I pulled him aside and asked if he was actually high in my class. He said he was so anxious about final exams he hadn't slept in over 4 days. I told him that's really bad and he could start hallucinating. He replied, "I know. I did a series of sleep deprivation experiments on myself when I was younger, increasing the duration by 12 hours each time. I discovered that I start hallucinating at around 32 hours, faces, people in my peripheral vision, and shit gets really weird at 50 to 60 hours, full, incoherent conversations. I think I became psychic at 72, but have been unable to verify, seriously. I wrote in a journal for the last hour I was awake each time. It was interesting seeing the effects of the increasing sleep deprivation on my writing, both in content and form. After 72 hours I remember just really flowing. Pure stream on consciousness writing. When I woke up the next day it was all crazy hieroglyphs, scribbles, and gibberish. Background to both, I was about 21 at the time, Waking up at 3 a.m. to do milk deliveries to stores in my refrigerated truck, hard labor, long drives between areas, mainly rural, and long hours. After which I would go visit my girlfriend who lived on her family ranch, and I would often stay there until 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. So, not enough sleep. I developed narcolepsy that stayed with me for a year or two after. Also, in case it comes up, I did not drink back then, nor do recreational drugs. I was a good Christian boy in those days. Story 1, The Crocolisk. I was driving to my apartment. 1:30 a.m. Small country town in Texas. I go down a hill and start going across the low water crossing near my place. All of the sudden, what the fuck is that? I slam on my brakes, squealing the tires and swerving near the edge. Emerging from the water without a ripple was a crocolisk. Yeah, from WoW, World of Warcraft, which had come out the same year and I was also spending time playing. The thing was a good 15 feet long and built like a tank. Crazy realistic detail. I didn't think it was from WoW in that moment. There was just a monster moving across the road, my headlights shining on it, whomping its way across the bridge. I almost crashed into it. Nearly crapped my pants. It slid quietly into the water on the other side after it briefly swiveled its head and hissed at me. I sat there shaking for a good minute trying to figure out what happened. It was so real. I heard it, saw it. It interacted with the environment. But another part of my mind told me there no way a six-legged ancient crocodilian creature was alive and living unnoticed in the river running through town. It's still real in my mind. Story 2, The Flashing Red Ghost Lights, or the Curious Case of the Police Anti-Abduction. It's 2 months after the crocolisk. I had been trying to do better with sleep and rest. That night, and the previous few days, I had been doing really well. 5 hours solid of rest, which was good at the time, eating better, leaving by around 10 p.m. to drive home, etc. This night it was a little later. 10:45 p.m. Weekday. I'm feeling good. I was even reflecting on how much improvement I had in my driving fatigue. After about 15 minutes, I come to the same low water crossing a few blocks from my apartment that had the crocolisk, which I thought of every time I crossed now. After the low water crossing, you go up the other side and hit a T-junction with a red light on a rural road. The light had no sensor, and a messed up timer after a certain time, leading to a good 2-minute wait doing nothing, waiting for it to change. Police loved it, they would get people running it all the time. So I pull up to the light. I'm waiting there a good minute. I ponder running it myself, and look around to see if I can see any other vehicles. Then the light starts blinking. I think. Power outage. Not too unusual. I look around, ready to go. Then I notice the cabin of my car is flashing bright red. It's filling my entire car cabin. It was freaky as hell. Country road, flashing red lights filling my car. I know how this goes. Abduction and anal probe, coming up. I'm concerned. A bit frightened. I'm ready to peel out of there. Then. Bam. Bam. Bam 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 bam. Something was hitting my car right next to me. I could feel it. Once again, on the same stretch of road, I nearly pissed myself. Then. I woke up. In the middle of the road. And there was a sheriff shining his flashlight at me. He was banking on my door. The lights in the cabin? The flashing lights of the police cruiser behind me right at my bumper. I was indeed at the intersection. Passed out, I had a manual and was on level ground, so was not moving anywhere. Son. Son. Are you alright? Hey, don't close your eyes again. Son. Roll down your window. Right now. I roll it down, and I know I'm fucked. He asks if I was on drugs or drinking. No, it was evident quickly I hadn't taken anything. His demeanor changed. He was, surprisingly, amazing. As the officer explained it, they had been following me for almost a mile. I was swerving everywhere. I almost went off the low water crossing. Then I just rolled to a stop, right there. They had tried to call me on their speaker to get me out, it wasn't happening. That's when he got out, left his partner in the car to watch, and when he saw me he thought I was OD'd. I gave him the 15-second version of long hours, late nights, and recently developing narcolepsy. He asked if I lived nearby, and if I thought I could make it home. I said yes, and he and his partner escorted me to the gates of my apartment. No arrest. No ticket. And to this day, I am still grateful for how they handled it. Epilogue. Shortly after these, I started drifting while driving the big truck on the country roads between towns. I saw a doctor, got a prescription. But I knew the roads so well and it became possible for me to keep driving and dreaming I was alert and awake on some stretches. It felt real. But it wasn't. On a bright afternoon, I was feeling pretty good. Blue sky, puffy clouds, making good time. Then I hear honking and swerving. For a moment I thought someone behind me got in a wreck. Then my eyes suddenly snapped open. I was driving in the oncoming lane of the two-lane road. I had drifted off and ran a family off the road. I corrected and pulled over. They weren't hurt, luckily it was flat ground and fields. They waved me off with a middle finger and some well-deserved language. I was shaking for a good 10 minutes before I could continue. I called my boss up that day and told him I was resigning and they needed someone to drive with me until I was replaced. Used to work retail and was trying to make money at 2 jobs, worked at a sporting goods store, SG, and worked the pre-Black Friday shift. When I went to leave my manager asked if I could work the Black Friday overnight, came with a pay differential so I did. 8 a.m. I went to my other job at Farm and Ranch Store, FR, at this point I had worked 16 hours at SG and been awake at least 24. Punched the clock and started next shift, worked a fairly relaxed shift and it was almost over when I got a text from SG manager, can you work this afternoon? Working day of meant double pay as well as whatever I worked being matched in holiday pay, so hell yeah. Went back on over and clocked in, mostly doing sales and watching for thieves NBD. Killed that shift and was offered to close, needed the money so I did. At this point I have worked 40 hours and been up over 48. It is now night and the sales holiday is winding down. Most employees have left and the call to close is made. It's me and a friend left to pick up, and wait for our delivery truck to pull up. Preface, I don't have cats and we for sure did not have one in the store. But I kept seeing one, darting only in the corner of my vision. Blew it off the first few times but then I got curious. I began to try to catch a view of so when I would see it if jerk my head in that direction always nothing. Finally I knocked over one of the apparel racks in an attempt to catch it. This took place right in front of my buddy and he said something to the effect of what the hell was that about, is everything okay? All I remember was explaining to him about the car and him laughing at me and saying there's no cat here. After going home and getting some much needed sleep I knew I was just wing an idiot and the cat must have been my mind playing tricks, but in the moment that dang thing was real. I never hallucinated, but once I became so sleep deprived that I experienced microsleep episodes. I only know they happened because I was driving. PSA, I was a dumb teenager at the time, do not ever drive while sleep deprived, and while I could have sworn I was awake the whole time, I suddenly found myself swerving into oncoming traffic with no recollection of the 1 to 2 seconds prior. I get so mad at myself when I think back on that. I could have fucking killed someone, all because my underdeveloped teenage brain thought driving while sleep deprived was okay because at least I'm not drunk. Stupid. For my 21st birthday I went on a 5-day party spree. With not a lot of sleep. And a lot of alcohol. Maybe 10 hours sleep over the 5 days. The final day I stopped drinking and spent some time in my room. I started to have these shakes. I could feel myself fall asleep but I heard this massive banging on my door. I ran to the door thinking like, who the fuck is banging at this time, it being like 3 a.m. at the time. When I opened the door, there wasn't anyone there. There was no way someone could have run off either. I just thought, okay, it's time to calm down and actually have some sleep. Spring break 1992, awake I think 45 hours or more, drunk and in an open-air club on the beach with a second level that overlooked the bar and dance floor. I just remember standing up there and everything below me began to swirl and I could hear the colors and they talked to me and I was transfixed and finally my friends grabbed me because the club was closing and we stumbled back to the motel room. I figure I was standing on the balcony and not moving for at least an hour, but who knows. I was climbing a big mountain via a technical rock route. We ended up summiting right at sunset and had to hike/scramble down the descent track in the dark, which was much harder than doing it in daylight. It was endless talus, loose rock, and bulletproof glacier ice. All in all, my partner and I were moving continuously for 27 straight hours. Despite the big day, our legs stayed strong and our eyes were what failed us, having been strained by our weak headlamps. We both were hallucinating pretty much constantly by around hour 23 or 24. I thought I saw a Doberman. Every stick looked like a snake. Lots of things looked like trail signs until we got closer and closer and it was just a log. As miserable as it sounds, it's a pretty cool to experience to push yourself to the brink and understand what's possible. I had been awake for about 38 hours. I was listening to music and I had been awake for so long that the loud volume of the music was really annoying me so I went to turn it down. When I turned the dial to lower the volume I realized the stereo was off. I have while working a cleaning job at a restaurant. I imagined seeing parsley sprigs every foot of carpet. I saw mice, ducklings, and insects running across the floor and appearing to get run over by the vacuum cleaner I was using. Of course I would stop and check. Took me over twice as long as needed to finish the cleaning after stopping every 5 minutes to check for dead ducks in the vacuum nozzle. However, it was the drive home that made me quit. I know the neighborhood like the back of my hand, but imagine bends in a straight road. After scuffing the curbs on both sides of the road, I pulled over, called my boss, and quit on the spot. Napped for an hour until I was clear-headed enough to make it back to the office. Could have killed someone, but it was at 4 a.m. before anyone was on the road. Never again. It's happened a few times. In fact, it's normal for me to see tracers and hallucinate when I'm sleepy, or have been woken up abruptly. When sleep-deprived, I see a semi-transparent geometric pattern overlay, or a vortex when looking at something bright and plain, sky, illuminated white wall, etc. The most annoying one was where, if I'd see a dot or fleck on something, my brain would trick me into seeing it spiral into place in the same motion every time, as if it had just landed there, even though it hadn't moved. This even applied to marks on my skin or punctuation on a page. It was really jarring. During a really unhealthy point, like several days with less than 5 hours sleep whilst taking stimulants round the clock, I saw some shadow people. One of them was like a large, hunched figure that turned and strode toward me in my peripheral vision, but vanished when I looked to see what was there. The way it moved felt as if it was opportunistically trying to get me with my back turned. I knew it was a trick of the mind, so didn't care. The final straw was when I was trying to fix me something to eat and a shadowy figure crawled towards me on all fours like it was scrambling to possess me before it vanished. Soon after, in the very spot the creature disappeared, I randomly got into an argument with the person I was living with, and I briefly thought the creature might have orchestrated it. It was then that I realized I was in a bad way and needed to get some rest. Haven't been close to that tired since. I do this a few times a year for my hobby. The competitions last 48 hours straight, and if you want to win, you have to stay in the chair all 48 hours. The first day is really easy. The hallucinations always start around 3 a.m. on the second day. It normally starts with seeing things in the room that look like your dog, then slowly morphs into hearing things that aren't really there. The biggest struggle is to keep functioning at a high level. There have been countless times that I sit there and have no recollection as to what I'm supposed to be doing. Once the sun rises on the second day, I'm good to go again until the end, but from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. is the absolute worst. I once stayed up for about 60 hours in a row to finish an important essay in third-year college. At about the 36-hour mark, I started having intrusive thoughts about how nice it would be to slip under my duvet, rub my face against my pillow, and close my eyes. At about 48 hours I started getting the feeling that someone was in the room watching me. When I turned around, of course, no one would be there. Over the next few hours it gradually got worse and worse. I started feeling that the watcher was getting closer and closer to me, and every time I turned around to check if someone was there it just seemed to get worse. It peaked just at about 56 hours in, when it felt like I could turn around and someone would be face to face with me. I felt as close to this non-existent person as if they were standing behind me with their hands on the arms of my chair, looking over my shoulder. It was some spooky shit. Then dawn broke, and the feeling subsided. My spooky feeling evaporated. I finished my report, went into campus to hand it in, had a soda, spoke to a few friends, and went straight home again to catch up on sleep. My place wasn't haunted. But that 60-hour stint of no sleep and grueling effort was a journey into the unknown. It's a strange feeling, looking at the clock and seeing it read 3:25 a.m. and knowing your work has still barely started, and that in 12 hours' time you still won't even be halfway through your task. Years ago I was working 3 jobs, one part-time Monday to Friday from 4 a.m. to 11 a.m., one full-time Tuesday to Saturday closing shift at a Subway, and the third one was Saturday mornings only. After a few months I started hearing things, then I seeing things out of the corner of my eye, like a shadow, but you just miss it if you looked. It was weird at first. I'd be in the back at Subway, hear the bell for the door go, walk out and no one was there. The worst was seeing things. My early morning job was sorting packages in a warehouse by myself until the drivers came in around 8 a.m. Was scary as hell. Never doing that again. Was working at a shitty call center. I was the overnight manager and some people had called in sick, so they needed me to cover during the day. Ended up working for 3 days straight with only 2 3-hour-long breaks. At the end of the endurance run of near slave labor, my good friend was having a party that I had previously agreed to go to. I caught a ride to the party with another friend, Don't remember anything about that night except that I asked my ride to take me home early because I was getting paranoid about something, don't remember what. I was hallucinating. In the car ride home I tried to shut my eyes to sleep, but all the caffeine I had ingested to stay awake for the party wouldn't let me actually go to sleep. I recall seeing a snowman running towards me really fast, which, aside from the obvious ridiculousness, makes even less sense in the middle of summer in Florida. Don't really have much other memories of that night though. I had been awake for over 80 hours without REM sleep. Vowed to never subject myself to that kind of sleep deprivation torture ever again. It took years for me to recover from working that overnight shift job. 0-10 do not recommend. I put recover in quotes because even though I now have a regular sleep schedule, my personality had been permanently altered by the experience. I was working the series finale of Dawson's Creek as a stand-in during the day, and then I had to get to my night job as a background actor on the series pilot episode of One Tree Hill. They both filmed at the same time in the town where I live. They overlapped filming like this for 3 nights/4 days. By the last night I was hallucinating and thinking the shadows on the ground were holes and I was so worried I was going to fall into one. I don't know how I didn't die while driving home on the last day. Shadows were really getting to me. I was 18 and trying to get into the business one way or another. It was the first semester of the second year of my physics degree, which is probably the hardest semester in the course as it's when the big guns maths makes an appearance and a lot of other hard stuff gets laid on. Anyway, this is when my body decided it was time to develop crippling insomnia. When it's bad you're never really truly awake or asleep. When you do finally crash out, you're in some sort of semi-lucid limbo where you're never really sure if what you're experiencing has really happened, and if it did, how much time has passed since you acknowledge it consciously. The course itself was pretty high contact time, 25 hours per week including lab and tutorials, so there often wasn't really much point going home between lectures, leading to a lot of time being spent in the common room. During this time I started to have hallucinations while understimulated between lecture/lab, which I guess was my brain trying to decompress. Nothing too wild at first, just improbable people using the vending machine and then disappearing. Eventually the improbable people would start talking to me, which I would ignore. One day I came around to a girl on my course waving her hand in front of my face while saying hello, are you okay over and over. I thought she was a hallucination and ignored her. When it clicked that she wasn't a hallucination, I said, oh, sorry, I thought you weren't real, which led to some odd looks from her. She explained that I had been blankly staring into space for a good 10 minutes. It was at this point that I decided medical intervention was needed. I once worked a week-long summer camp that went seriously off the rails. Like, kids lost in a foreign country levels of bad. Like Fire Festival levels of bad. The first night we were there we had an accident where all the kids' luggage was sent to a single hostel, not the hostel we were staying at either. We took a bus to pick it up but it wasn't all labeled either, so we sorta had to guess whose was whose. That took all night. Day 2 we did some walking tours, but it was Sunday, and all the stores in the area were closed and we couldn't get any water for the kids. Someone ended up driving more than 50 miles to buy bulk water bottles from a highway rest area. That night we had a 1 a.m. staff meeting that went until almost 4. I ended up staying up to try and hammer out some more organization, since we had a kid go missing when he was, in fact, asleep in his bed the whole time. By day 3 I hadn't slept even a wink in more than 48 hours and my happy face for the kids was fading. I cried into my computer for close to half an hour talking to one of the other staffers about how much of a disaster this was turning out to be. His name was Andy and he and I had staffed for the camp together before. That night I went to sleep and slept maybe 3 hours before waking up for another 1 a.m. staff meeting. I told everyone in the room how Andy and I had worked out a few ideas earlier in the day while we were exasperated. Everyone was confused, because nobody named Andy was on this trip. In fact, nobody named Andy even worked for them. Andy was someone I'd worked with at a completely different summer camp 3 years earlier and hadn't even spoken to in a year. I hallucinated that entire conversation. To this day I vividly remember talking to Andy in that room. Yup. Working in telecom on cell sites is a tough game. We had to work all day on a tower hauling new equipment and stuff like that, then my top hand, like a second in command to the foreman, me at the time, and I had to do a maintenance window project at a different site in the city. We ran into lots of issues that night and ended up working all night. Then, the management wanted the first site to be completed that day, and the rest of our crew was rested and ready to go. You wouldn't leave 2 techs on a site alone without a foreman or top hand, so we just drove back to the first site. My second and I ended up working until 10 p.m. that night. When I was driving back I was hallucinating hard. The people's red taillights of those in front of me started morphing into bunnies or deer or clouds, just really random things. All the other lights were tracing and leaving trails. Very nerve-wracking. Being from that industry, that certainly wasn't my first or last time working myself into hallucinations. We called it seeing the black dog. The cellular game is much underrated and unknown to a lot of people. It's one of the most dangerous jobs you can do. I commonly had to work these 24 to 36-hour shifts to keep on schedule, and on top of that, slinging around hundreds of pounds of steel when you're hanging off a 300-foot tower is pretty damn physically demanding. I miss those days and I don't miss those days. It was the most fun I never want to have again. I've done it somewhat on the regular, for various reasons, although I've never got to the point of demon faces and stuff that some people talk about. I used to work at an abandoned manor, old rundown thing, and spent a lot of time in the dark. Was a good laugh and got along with my coworkers, so it was pretty common that we would stay up late drinking most nights and would shotgun energy drinks the next day like it was water for days on end. Don't think my liver has recovered yet still. Think it was 3 to 4 day one and I start seeing 3 lights floating around at above head height in one of the old corridors. At first I thought it was pikeys or something, so followed after it to the woods on the grounds. Am convinced I can hear something scraping along the leaves and shit on the ground, and the lights appear again and Terry's this shadowy figure, about 7 feet tall with these 3 pins of light about 10 meters in front of me. I stop dead and I am fucking terrified until it slowly dawns on me I've been up 3 to 4 days. I blink a few times and the lights disappear and I'm staring at the space between trees. Then Terry's ones when I've been on stag and convinced Terry's a bunch of people out and about watching you, although I know that's a pretty common, takes a lot out of you just to focus in and double check before calling it in. Or you catch shadows in the corner of your vision, that you spent ages trying to chase down only for your buddy to tell you it was a bush or a rock. I think the worst ones for that are when something is there, like a burnout car in the dark, though, and your brain just projects this image onto it, and once you've seen it you can't unsee it even though every fiber in your body is telling it can't reasonably be there. Being tired and in the dark seriously fucks with your head, man, sends that fight or flight impulse in your monkey brain into overdrive. I forgot my identity, who I was, where I was, who are these people in the other room. It was 3rd day of no sleep. We were 3 young idiots playing video games and smoking a lot of weed. The first to sleep would lose. At some point I went to the kitchen, and when I got there my mind went blank, asking myself what I was doing here. Am I hungry? Then I heard my friends laugh and talk, and I didn't know who were those people. Are they in my house? Or am I in theirs? But WHO am I? WTF? So I just waited a few minutes? No idea how long that was, staring at the wall, afraid one of the stranger in the next room would see me, until I remembered where I was, my name, my life, etc. Went back to my friends and I told them my name with enthusiasm. I was so happy to know it. Very weird existential crisis to forget everything about yourself and your close ones. I try to remember that moment when I see people losing memories and forgetting their family. I understand just a little how confusing that must be. This will likely get buried, but here goes. I work in an underground gold mine, and after my 10-hour shift underground I usually run what's called Tulare mode, which is essentially operating a scoop loader made for underground, remotely from an office on surface to move blasted material in between shifts while the blast gas is clear. It's very hard to stay awake after night shift, 4 a.m. in a dark room watching a TV screen and doing the same thing over and over again. I've hallucinated a few times where I see figures or people in random places. I know there's no way there could be anyone down there, but it scares the shit out of me every time. Greyhound to Arkansas years ago to visit my buddy. He had just moved into his apartment and had no furniture. Nothing. No table, no chairs, no couch, or bed. All he had was toilet paper, alcohol, and a bag of pot. He had just split with his gal and didn't take anything. We were drinking and he found an ad for baby pit bulls, so he bought one. We were pretty toasted when they dropped this dog off, so we didn't notice that this dog was the runt, too small to be properly weaned, and its little stomach was swelled up like it swallowed a racquetball. We're playing with it and saw a little white worm drop out of its ass. That's my phobia. I have a fear of parasites. And there we were in a small apartment with a tiny dog dropping worms out its ass with nowhere to sleep but the floor it was sprinkling them on, and God knows for how long it had before we noticed it. We didn't want to shut him in the bathroom, cause that's the last place you want worms, and we figured they could crawl under the doors of any closets, and we didn't have a car. So we stayed up. Sobered up without any sleep. In the morning we walked to the vet, got the dog a shot, and he told us 12 to 24 hours and he'll evacuate them. So we stayed up. Imagine 2 guys in an empty apartment following a dog around with an unfolded newspaper ready to catch anything that fell out of its ass before it hit the floor. It was fucking weird. The dog thought we were fucking weird. Hours go by, nothing. Finally, this little dog, which at this point is just trying to get the hell away from us, creeps away while we're talking. We spot him in the squat position and I dove headfirst with the paper stretched out in front of me. The dog tried to stop shitting and run, but it was too late. I can't describe this without you thinking I'm over-exaggerating, but I'm not. What came out of this little dog's ass was a mass of worms nearly the length and width of a can of Red Bull. It was, I swear, longer than the dog. Hundreds of worms wrapped up like a loose brick of spaghetti. And all happened within a foot from my face. Anyway, I didn't sleep that night and the next day was my bus ride home. By this point I'd been up for 3 days. I didn't sleep on the bus on my way up there. So I'm sitting on the bus on the way back home, and when I close my eyes I hear techno music. I'm not into techno, it's not my thing, but when I would close my eyes I could hear it like it was in the background somewhere. I'd open my eyes and it would go away. Close them and it would come on. I was aware it wasn't really there but could not get it to stop. Also, looking at the floor I would swear I saw tiny worms just outside where my eyes were focused, but when I would focus on the spot I saw them it was gone. I knew this wasn't real, but it was a greyhound so it could have been there. Anyway, I got home and slept for 20 hours, but that's what I saw and heard. Oh, for those interested, that dog turned out okay. I saw him when he was fully grown and he turned into the biggest, pure muscle pit I've ever seen. I didn't sleep for 3 days with COVID because every time I'd fall asleep I'd wake up gasping for air. Anyways, third day up with 104 fever, unable to breathe, I went to ER. I thought they were playing jazz music but I was just hallucinating. I could hear lyrics and everything of songs I've never heard before. I kept looking around while admitted in the ER, wondering why they were playing loud-ass music in a hospital. Nope, just hallucinating. When I was a freshman in college I took this super stressful full-time job on top of my full course load. I would go weeks at a time getting like 2 to 4 hours a night. It was really bad, but survivable. But I had big problems with driving on the highway. You get hypnotized just watching the lines in the road go by. I would see shadow people often. Shadows or debris in the road would become people and I would hit the brakes to avoid smashing into them. Or looking off in the distance over oceans of corn and soybeans, if there was a round-looking hill or a house or something I could perceive it as a giant rat or bird or something. At the time, white-knuckling my way through that lifestyle was a point of pride. Thought I was tough. As an adult, thinking about driving in that state seems incredibly fucking stupid and dangerous. 6 days. Day 2 was fine, Day 3 started to slow down. Day 4 was starting to hurt mentally. Day 5 is where it all went downhill. Had exams but not your typical paper ones. Had to build a server system with multiple layers of blah blah. Problem being, I started a week before the exam due date. The extreme was 3 weeks. On Day 5 I was not hallucinating but man, I could feel my heart start to give in. Passed out for about 15 minutes after finishing my exam on Day 6 before the due delivery time. So you could say I did sleep for a bit, I guess. When going home I asked my brother, who was like 11 at the time, to pick me up with his small-ass bicycle. Sat on it, cycled him home instead because I kind of lost all reasoning and cycling is easier than walking, I thought. Well, not with someone extra there. Came home, passed out for 2 days, I believe. I can't remember much anymore after I got home. Please people, make sure you get enough sleep. Once I got called into work for a graveyard shift after being up for most of a weekend. While driving in, I looked at my speedometer and all the numbers jumbled together and then sort of crumpled and fell down into a heap. It was just like a cartoon animation. It was kind of scary because I felt fine and didn't realize at all how impaired I was until that happened. I'll probably be buried, but I was working a hotel pulling doubles for weeks straight. Some of them were scheduled, some I got guilted into because my replacement called off. I was going to college full-time and in the middle of studying for finals, and also finishing multiple projects. At multiple points I was up for just over 4 to 5 days straight. I would start to hear things, like the phone ringing or police sirens. A couple times I would see people walking in and be in the process of checking them in before I couldn't find their reservation and then would realize I was just talking to myself. I would work 3 p.m. to 7 a.m., go to school 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. and be back to work that shift again. Sometimes the night audit would actually show up and my supervisor was chill, so he'd give me an out-of-order room to sleep in, but I would just end up finishing homework. Every couple days I would sleep a couple hours, but overall I lost about 20 pounds and would drink a whole hotel-sized coffee pot by myself throughout my double shifts. Driving was the worst because I would have to talk to someone or I would start to fall asleep. However, finding someone to talk to at 7 a.m. isn't that easy when you have basically no friends and your family is at work or school. One time I fell asleep on the highway. I luckily woke up without injuring anyone, but it was multiple exits past where I needed to get off. I would not recommend this to anyone. This was the worst time of my life and I would never do it again. However, I needed the money and to finish school. I found out later my friends told my professors what was going on, so I'm sure my professors went easy on me those weeks. Maybe they didn't notice if I napped while sitting class occasionally, but I still presented all my projects and graduated. For me, it's time lapses. I could tell I wasn't just dozing off. I was awake yet time would sort of skip. I wasn't even missing anything really, because I would like a movie, then the skip happens and I have to sort of remind myself all over again where I am and what I'm doing, and if I think hard enough I can remember the scenes of the movie I watched. So I actually did watch the scenes, but somehow the memories almost disappeared and I have to remind myself that I did watch the scenes. Something like that. This is a very unique experience for me only when I'm tired, since it's different from like getting very drunk. When I'm drunk I can forget things but I don't feel like time skipped. I can tell I did something but just forgot. Whereas when I'm tired, it's like momentarily vanished from existence and I have to remind myself I exist. Some buddies and I thought it would be fun to stay up for 3 days at a youth retreat. On day 3, we couldn't take it anymore and all of us conked out during a lecture. I'm told that I stood up and power walked away, but all I remember was waking up a mile away, walking down a county highway. My immediate reaction was to believe that I was dead. I have never before or since sleepwalked, nor labored under the impression of my own demise. Yeah, 3-night camping trip with a bunch of friends back when I was like 15 or 16. We all wanted to see who could stay awake the longest because that's what dumb teenagers do. I didn't sleep until the 3rd night, so I would have been awake for somewhere around 60 hours if I'm doing the math right in my head. Things had started to get pretty weird already on the 2nd evening, around dusk. Walking through the woods, my eyes started to kind of blur all of the trees into a wall, and my brain kept perceiving the grayish sky as a ceiling. I kept thinking to myself, how am I walking in a hallway? I know I'm outside right now. Then I'd stop walking and the scene would go back to normal. The spooky stories around the campfire were also particularly scary that night. Lol. The 3rd day, I kept seeing little gnomes waving at me, but I was still rational enough to know that was impossible. So I'd run over to see if I was really just seeing shit, and it'd be a trash bag or something waving in the wind. That was pretty much all I remember being weird during the daytime. By the nighttime, when I finally slept, I kept seeing the darkness of the night like physically manifesting and closing in on me. It was terrifying. Looking back, I'm certain that it was just my fucked off brain's way of perceiving my eyes forcing themselves shut from the sleep deprivation, but it was enough to finally knock me out. This happened to me while I was working as an EMT to get through school. I had 2 full-time jobs plus full-time school, so it wasn't unusual for me to be awake for days at a time. This particular instance was after something like 5 days without sleep. It started while I was driving an ambulance back to my district after dropping a patient off at the hospital. It was just my partner and I in the truck, and it was about 3 in the morning, just for context. My partner was already asleep before I ever got back in the truck and wouldn't wake up, so I felt I had to drive back despite being awake for so long. As I was driving, it looked like cars around me were melting and I could see sinkholes just appearing out of nowhere and giant iron-type gates appearing and opening in front of me. It was weird because I was with it enough to know that those things weren't real and I was completely terrified. By some miracle I made it back to the station without killing myself or anybody else, but the whole experience was just awful. I realize now how dangerous that lifestyle was in so many ways, but at the time I felt it was necessary because I couldn't afford to work less and I needed to get through school because I knew I physically couldn't work that much for the rest of my life. Overall, absolutely terrifying and actively dangerous situation that I'm lucky to have survived. 0 stars. Do not recommend. Yes. I used to work as an EMT at a station that wasn't manned 24/7. There was someone on call, but we had pagers and responded from our own homes. The station didn't have enough of a call volume to support having personnel stay there overnight, essentially meaning we had maybe 2 to 5 calls on a busy day, and 1 or 2 night calls a week. There was always a busy week or a run of a few days in a row that it was busy. 2 years ago in July, there was a run of about 3 days with calls almost literally back to back. My chief was older at the time and did what he could, but some of the younger staff, including myself, tried to pick up more shifts to ease his job a bit. I didn't sleep more than 20 or 30 minutes at a time for those 3 days, and even with approximately 2 hours of sleep a day, 6 hours total across 3 days, I almost went insane. The vital sign machine would look blurry to me, and out of focus, so I couldn't read it. I was slurring my words, I saw people and things out of the corner off die by the end of the third day. It was so bad my supervisor pulled me off the truck for 96 hours and made me sleep and see a doctor. But it started so gradually I didn't even know until I was almost too far gone. The first sign was I couldn't remember when or where I was constantly. I kept asking for the date and time, and couldn't remember it. Then I forgot patient details and their responses to my questions. I even started to forget what questions I had just asked. It was rough, and I learned a good lesson about personal limits. I once stayed up for 2 days straight to get a work project out by a deadline. 40+ hours of staring at Excel spreadsheets and graphs. I was working from home and could hear people talking in the other rooms of the house when no one was actually home. I kept thinking I saw things move out of the corner of my eye, but could never actually find anything that would have made the movement I had perceived. I knew that I was extremely tired and my mind felt like mush, so I largely shrugged off what I was seeing as the effects of sleep deprivation without much further thought. What creeped me out the most though was what I started seeing right before I finally went to bed. My wife and I have a stationary video monitor over our child's crib and we leave the video receiver on at night while we sleep. I keep hearing our baby wake up and cry or laugh as I started to doze off, so I would then sit up to look at the monitor and realize she was actually still asleep. However, as I continued to watch the monitor, the video on the receiver would pan around the room. I knew this wasn't possible since the monitor was stationary and had no way to pan the camera, yet somehow I was watching the camera move. At that point I had to wake up my wife and ask her to logically convince me that I was actually hallucinating due to lack of sleep and that nothing strange was going on in our child's room. Gave me the chills to say the least. I was about to embark on a long journey overseas. My friend and I decided that since we had a 4 to 5 hour flight to LAX with a 10-hour layover before leaving for Auckland, New Zealand, which is between a 12 to 15 hours flight, that let's stay up for 2 days beforehand so that when we arrive we have slept the entire flight and be better suited to New Zealand time. This was a total failure in logic for two fully grown men. The story, however, is great. Needless to say, around 52 hours into this ludicrous decision, we were not on our best game. As soon as we land in LAX we realize my friend had left his wallet with around $300 cash, his credit cards, and his driver's license lying somewhere in the Atlanta airport. This is lesson 1 on why you should be well rested before international travel. Luckily he made copies of everything for overseas travel and had his passport in his carry-on bag. We also found his bank in LA and got his cards cancelled and one temp card until his new ones would be shipped to our hostel in New Zealand. We managed all of this while nearing the point of delirium from sleep deprivation. At this point we are feeling better about our decisions and confident that we are good to go now. This is where lesson 2 arrives. We then brilliantly decided that since we were in LA why not hit a newly opened dispensary and grab a joint, a bag of edibles for us to enjoy before our flight. We bought the supplies and headed to a nearby park where we enjoyed the joint to calm ourselves from the day's previous events, which I believe it did. We go to the airport where we sit and await our check-ins for the flight. As the check-in sign lights up we have a discussion of when should we eat all of the edibles since I highly doubted it was legal to take these to New Zealand. I was most definitely correct, that decision for when was in fact right now. Oh, I failed to mention that when we each purchased a 100 mg chocolate bar, we got a 100 mg bag of gummies to go with it for free. How fucking lovely. We each consume 200 mg of edible marijuana, which I can tell you that if you are not a heavy consumer of in the first place is entirely way too much. We check in and are stopped immediately. Why? Because this is a one-way ticket. We are not citizens of New Zealand. We therefore have to show the provided proof of purchase of a ticket to another country or a return trip to the US. As first-time international travelers that are embarking on a multi-country experience with no real timeline. This is something we did not know. The edibles are setting in hard at this point. We managed to book a few tickets to Japan and waddle our freshly zombified bodies towards security. I prayed as the man checked my passport he just wouldn't look me in the eyes. We finally make it through security and onto the plane. As I sit down, my last thought was, I wonder what dinner will be. I woke up 13 hours later, with several passengers staring at me. I have no idea what I did in my sleep, but I imagine I was a treat to sit with. I was completely wrecked, and once we got to our hostel, I slept the entire day. Woke up for dinner, booked a rental car, and slept for 12 more hours. Yes, I was up for 7 days straight, dawn to dawn. It was sorta not intentional. I was between jobs and got super into an online game before realizing that the sun had come up 3 times since I had started. So I figured screw it, I'll just stay up for a week. Because that's what you do when you're young and stupid. On the third or fourth day I started getting weird flickering/fleeting shadows out of the corner of my eye, and it went downhill from there. The hallucinations were never sharp or clear, they were always moving/twitching blotches and shadows, always out of the corner of my eye. Ultimately I managed to make it to 7:30 a.m. 7 days later. I was completely exhausted, wrung out, scatterbrained as all hell, and could barely hang on to a coherent train of thought. When the click ticked over I immediately passed out and slept for 36 hours straight. When I woke up I had a massive headache, I was extremely groggy like I'd slept maybe a couple of hours, and thought I had slept 12 hours. Took me a bit to realize I had missed an entire day. As mentioned by others, this is definitely bad for you, do not recommend, and if I had known any better I wouldn't have pushed it so long. Those are some crazy stories of why it is very important to get plenty of sleep. I personally get delirious after 2 days of little sleep and refuse to drive. Please like and subscribe for more videos, and give it a big thumbs up so more people can find this channel.